Hi everyone, welcome to Foley Down Under, episode 2. There's a lot of information in this one, so I've split it into two sections. There's a part 1 and a part 2 of episode 2. We'll start off with room design. You may be thinking of building a new room. If so, some of these suggestions might work well for you. Or if you have an existing room, it's just some of the things that I've done with mine to make it work well. And in part 2, we'll go into the Foley pits themselves. Part 2 will be uploaded a couple of days after part 1. Sit back and enjoy. Okay, so the most basic part of your Foley room is your floor, the structure of where all your pits are going to sit. Now this has to be a very solid piece of concrete and preferably not a floating floor. Now many studios are built with a floating floor, and those that don't understand the floating floor concept, it's where the actual concrete slab will sit up on rubber blocks. And there's a gap underneath it to stop transmission of sound into the actual concrete slab and into the room. The issue with that, for a Foley side of things, is when we jump up and down or do big impacts on that concrete floor, the whole slab will actually boom. And it's just a very unpleasant sound to have on your footsteps or any kind of noise. So all the rooms that I've built, I've actually made the concrete slab goes straight to earth. Depending on where you are, you might be living in a busy area with buses and trucks and things. It might not be as good, but generally speaking, as long as your slab isn't connected to the walls and it's got a gap between your performance area, so the stage itself, and the control room, where all this kind of stuff sits, you should be pretty right. I think it's much more of an advantage to have your slab right down on the ground. Now, the other thing you can do if you're building a room and you're going to pour a slab, there's a few tricks to do to the slab to make it less resonant. Now, apart from it being on the ground, anything that's flat, if you pick up a concrete tile, for instance, and you bang it, it's got like a little gunk, gunk kind of noise. It'll resonate. If you have lots of little dips and points on it, like the top of a Lego piece, it won't resonate as much because that surface area is broken up with the points. Now, if you look at here, this is a design of a concrete slab that not only stops the resonance of the slab, but it also helps it isolate it from the actual ground by having all these little cone shapes sitting underneath. So when you're making your slab, you'll have a chat to your builder about this because it might not work for him, but you still have to use your building plastic, your reinforcing mesh. But before you put all the plastic down, put a thick layer of sand, and then your building plastic, and then all your reinforcing stuff, and that normally sits on spaces just above the plastic. If you can, before that reinforcing wire goes on, go onto your plastic area with a cone-shaped device, and that could be the end of a bottle or a traffic cone. Cut little holes in the plastic and put dents down into the sand, maybe a foot apart, all the way over your slab area. So you end up with little cone shapes in there. It's a little bit time consuming. You might want to cut a little layer of plastic out and just put a little circle around there, so that's in there. So what happens then, when they pour the slab, you'll end up with all these little fingers out the bottom of your slab going into all these little cone-shaped holes that you've created. And that then gives you that breakup of the slab underneath to stop the resonance. As for the size of the Foley room, That's really up to the amount of space that you can afford. I've worked in some really tiny spaces and got some great results. You have to be a lot more careful with miking, and there's not enough. You don't have much room for having large pits. Rightio. So now we're going to have a chat about the actual acoustics of the room. Now, a lot of people think your Foley room should be very dead, as in there's no reflections, no echo, no reverb. I prefer to have sections of the room dead. So I've got sections of my room split up where I would be doing outside footsteps, exterior footsteps, so things on gravel and grass and concrete. I've got that in a dead part of the studio. I've got a live part of the studio where I've got a bit of resonance, which makes your Foley sound a lot more real. If everything's really dead and tight sounding, it's not going to sit in well with the actual other tracks, particularly if you have to match the actual sync track or the guide track. So that's basically a bit of experimentation within your room. It's just to find out if there's a live section, or if you can peel some of the acoustic treatment off the roof, or if you put a flat piece of board up instead that might be removable, just so you can change the reflections and the reverberation in the room. It gives you a lot more control on what your microphone will pick up. Now, one of the things you'll find when you first build your Foley room, or if you've perhaps just cleaned the Foley room and it's pristine, everything's back on the shelves, all the surfaces are bare, you'll find that the room might not sound as good as when you just finish working before you've cleaned it up. I find that. My wife, who records for me, she's the Foley mixer. I had a big clean up not long ago, and the first job we went back into, she said, "Why does it sound different?" And it's because there was junk everywhere soaking up, some of the reflections. So although sometimes you do want the reflections, when the room's empty, it might be too reflective. So yeah, it was a really good excuse for me just to leave all the junk lying around, because the room actually sounded better with just rubbish everywhere, providing you can still find all your props, of course, and you can navigate through there without tripping over. So now we've got our room built, assuming you've either built one or you have an existing room. Many places have rooms off to the side where they keep all the props, or like me, I've got most of my very large props outside. The ones that I don't use that often are outside my room, but all the ones I use nearly all the time are on shelves very close by, which just speeds up the whole process of recording Foley. If you can get your hands on the prop really quick, you just keep moving along. Some of the things you might put them on that you might need to have covers over, like I've got big metal car doors and sheets of iron and things which leaning on the wall. Most of the time they don't cause any drama unless I'm quite near it with my footsteps. In that case, I'll either shift the iron, or if I can't, I'll just throw a big thick blanket over it. That'll solve that problem. Now, in the previous episode, I mentioned that I work on a television monitor. It's a 65-inch monitor, and it's on a platform which goes up and down on a hydraulic ram. I'll mention that again because that is really, really useful. If you're working on the ground and you're doing dog feet or bird feet or anything like that, you don't want to have to be down on the ground with your head cranked up, especially if you've got a film when it's full of animals. You'll end up really cricking your neck. So that's why I found that having a TV that I could lower right down to ground level, when I'm on my hands and knees, I'm looking straight at it, not up in the air trying to see the actual television. Where I got mine from was actually an auto shop where they use it to car engines around or vehicle transmissions on. And it wasn't very expensive. It was like $200 Australian to buy that. And it holds hundreds of kilos, so it's going to hold a big television set quite easily. Okay, that's it for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. That will be uploaded very soon. If you have any questions on the room side of things, feel free to message me on Facebook and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Bye for now.